Hello, Internet. My name is P.T. Hylton, and today I've got a double shot for you of small towns with secrets. We've got Summer of Night by Dan Simmons and Salem's Lot by Stephen King. Let's start with Summer of Night. I've only ever read one other Dan Simmons book. It was a long time ago, and I honestly didn't like it very much, so I wasn't sure what to expect going in with this one, especially with the it's pretty thick book. I didn't want to get bogged down for a long time in a book that I wasn't interested in. What did interest me was that it seemed like it was kind of two of my favorite genres really combined. One is kind of the small town with a secret, which I've talked about a lot on my blog and other places. I love it when you're kind of thrown into a small town or someone comes to a small town and there's something weird going on there. You're not sure what it is. There's a million examples of it. One of my favorites is the Midwich Cuckoos, which became the movie Village of the Damned. Summer of Night is one of those books which got me excited about it, and also it's kind of a coming of age horror story, which is another subgenre that I love. So let's talk about Summer of Night. Basically, it's the story of this group of kids who goes to the school, and there's something a little weird about the school. It's the final year of the school. They get out on their summer vacation, and the school is going to not be used anymore. They're talking about tearing it down. They're not sure what's going to happen with it. Then someone the kids know disappears under mysterious circumstances, and it seems like no one other than the kids is very concerned about this. They think the kid just ran away. That's what starts the ball rolling for the story, and it's an interesting story because there's something weird going on in the town, and it seems like a lot of the adults may or may not be in on it. So really, the vast majority of the story is really told from these kids' perspective and these kids trying to investigate this. And there's an interesting kind of exploration of children and kind of the lack of power children have, and how they're in a lot of ways are at their parents' mercy, and these kids kind of trying to investigate this stuff and figure out what's going on with this evil in the town in spite of all those limitations. A couple things I really liked about the book. I liked the complexity of some of the characters in the book. The way it kind of took standard tropes of the genre and twisted them a little bit. So I love horror. Horror is one of my favorite genres, but one of my problems with it is a lot of times you'll see characters that are basically just kind of the same old tropes again and again. This book did something interesting with that. So, for instance, one of the kids is kind of like the most intellectual of the group, and as you often see in horror stories, his father is an abusive drunk. And, as soon as I saw that, I was like, well, okay, this is that same old trope where the dad's going to be a drunk, and he's upset he never made anything of his life, and he's resentful that his kid's smarter than he is, blah, blah, blah. But as you get further into the story, you start to realize that this dad, when he's not drinking, is actually a really good dad. And he's instilled this love of learning in his kid. So, you're not sure what to think of this character because he's, in most of the book, he's a really cool character that you kind of like. But then at other times, when he's drinking, he's abusive. He's, completely horrible. So I like the complexity of that character. Really interesting dynamic there. And also there's a priest in the story, and when you get a priest in a horror story, they're generally either going to be corrupt or they're going to be pretty incompetent, but the priest in this story is neither. So good job there. I really enjoyed that, and good story, and creepy too. As I got really into the book, I will say that for the first maybe 200 pages of the book were kind of slow going. I wasn't sure about the book or not. But as I got into the last half of the book, I really loved it. And in fact, my wife wanted to swing by the mall and run in and do some quick shopping. And so I asked, can I just stay in the car to read? So I did that, and I was reading this book, and there's a bell that plays a central role in the book that's kind of like an evil bell. But as I'm sitting there reading, all of a sudden I hear this church bell ringing. I'm like, what the heck? And I'm looking around, there is no church in sight. I'm like, what is going on? I was freaking out a little bit for a second there. And then my wife came out and I asked her about it. And I was like, first of all, I was like, did you hear that bell? Because she was just approaching the car at that time. And she thankfully said yes. If she said no, I would have been very worried. But and I said, where's that coming from? And then she pointed out there's actually a church over a little hill that we just couldn't see from there. So whew. But Dan Simmons, you kind of did freak me out a little bit there. So Summer of Night, good book, very good book. I gave it 4 stars. If you like kind of coming of age stories and you like horror, highly recommend it. Let's move on to Salem's Lot by Stephen King. So I've read a few of the earlier Stephen King works lately. I read Carrie back in, I think, May, which was the 40th anniversary of that book. Which when I read that, it was kind of like, Okay, you can see some of the Stephen King's, how he's going to become great in the story. There's hints of greatness in the story, but it was also a little bit clunky. So when I came to Salem's Lot, which was his next book after Carrie, I expected more of the same, and I was wildly wrong about that. This book is pretty masterfully done. If you ever, I don't know if you've ever had that experience where you just feel like a book is for you. I had that experience with Salem's Lot. I really, really loved it. First of all, just the way it opens is a brilliant opening, in my opinion. It opens with this man and this boy who are kind of on the run. They go across the country. They end up in Mexico, and every day he's getting the man's going on this trip to get this newspaper from Maine, and in the newspaper we learn that the town of Salem's Lot has basically been abandoned, is a ghost town now, and you don't really understand why or what's going on with that, and then it flashes back, and the rest of the book is leading back up to that point. Very brilliantly done, because it just casts a ominous air over the rest of the book. I usually don't like prologues that are like in the future or later, or a completely different time frame, and you don't know how it fits in at first. But in this case, it was very, very well done, and I liked it a lot. Great characters in this book. I love the way that Stephen King can just introduce a character very briefly, and just like it's like one of those artists who like draws caricatures, and they just draw a few lines, but you can tell it's the person, and you're like, how did they do that in just so few of lines? Stephen King's the same way, where he can just write a little paragraph about a minor character, and that character just comes to life. I don't know how he does it. I'm not sure what it is about his writing that makes those characters come to life so easily, but he's great at it. This book also features a priest who is not corrupt, and he's not completely incompetent. Maybe I proved my trope wrong on that one. I don't know. One section of this book I really loved was there's one section of the book where an adult has an encounter with a vampire and has a heart attack because he's so afraid. And shortly afterwards, a boy has an encounter with a vampire, and he's very scared also. But basically, right after that, he goes home and just goes to bed and goes to sleep without any problems. And the book talks about how adults are used to laying awake being worried about finances or worried about relationships or whatever, but kids are used to being laying awake at night being afraid of monsters being under their bed or in the closet. So when this boy actually sees a real monster, he can go right to sleep because he's used to being worried about that every night anyway. I thought that was a brilliant little point. Another point I want to bring out about it is I love the way it just unabashedly pays homage to Dracula in so many ways. I would love to see more books like that really build on the Dracula legacy and approach vampires in the way that Dracula does, as opposed to the way that we normally see vampires portrayed these days. Salem's Lot, I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. Good job, Stephen King. So those are my 2 books about small towns with a secret. That'll do it for this time. Please subscribe, comment below, whatever you normally do on YouTube videos. I will talk to you later.